Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today I'm so thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Hugh Grant to talk all about the HBO show, The Undoing. And I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about when you first signed on to this project, because you had a little bit of trepidation in jumping to a television project, partly because often with television, there's not a consistency with directors. You don't always have all the scripts up front. And I know obviously with this, you had Susanna Bier throughout the entire series, but was it something where you had the opportunity to read all of the scripts to really know all of the granular elements of who Jonathan was up front? Or did you have to get a lot of those details in conversations with Susanna and with David at the beginning?
Well, no, we did have all the scripts. I couldn't have done it any other way. It seems weird that you could do a series and not know where it's going to end, or where your character goes, especially whether they're a killer or not. So that was the first thing I needed to establish when they asked me to do this, because at that point they only had one episode written, and they said, yes, he's the killer. And I said, well, great, I love killing, I'll do it.
And I know that, part of your process is always that you're incredibly meticulous and you do a lot of breakdown of the lines and kind of like question every single piece of dialogue. And just wanted to ask a little bit more about what that process looks like when you're first sitting with the scripts and starting to develop your character before you've arrived on set with the rest of the cast and the rest of the crew.
Oh, well, it's very long and laborious, and it takes as long as I've got, which sometimes it depends what the gap is between when you sign on and when you start shooting, but that can be like a year. And I sit there for hours every day asking myself, so he asks for coffee with milk, why? And because you see, his mother gave him milk, or whatever it is. I mean, it's absurd. It's in that much detail. And then with this particular film, I refuse to call it television. It was very, very labyrinthine and complicated, my thoughts and motivations at any given moment in the film, because there's a discrepancy between what real Jonathan, sociopath, narcissist, is thinking, and what outward Jonathan, who I called innocent Jonathan, was performing and believing. Because I see innocent Jonathan was he really believed his innocence. He was that crazy. Although he knew deep down he was guilty, he just was too vain, too full of ego to really admit it. So when he says, I didn't do it, he means it. When he says, I love my wife, I love my son, he means it, even though really he doesn't love them at all. He just loves them loving him.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting to me as well that he's married to a clinical psychologist. And did you think about kind of what would have made him enter into a marriage like that? Because obviously that means that there's a little bit more subversion that's required on his part in having to hide who he is day to day.
It's a good point. I think such was his arrogance as a very successful, distinguished doctor himself, that he felt he got some satisfaction in fooling a top Harvard psychiatrist, and probably got off on it in a funny kind of way. It was probably quite sexy.
Yeah. Did that also play a lot into the relationship that you crafted on screen with Donald Sutherland, who's your character's father-in-law? Because he kind of seems to be the one person that's always been very suspicious of him. So I imagine there's been a bit more of a dance between the two of them throughout their entire relationship.
Yeah, I think that character made Jonathan very uneasy. He had rumbled him right from the beginning. When he says to Grace, Jonathan kind of adapted himself and made himself exactly what you wanted in a husband. That's when he first smelt a rat. And that's, of course, what Jonathan does. He knows exactly who to be and how to be in any given situation to win. Mm-hmm. He doesn't really stop winning till right at the end, when finally he jumps down off the rail of that bridge and actually thinks, I can probably make this okay now with Grace, and is shocked when she just drags the boy away.
Right. Did you view that as the motivation as to why he's jumping down and giving up that moment, purely because he does think that he's still in with a chance?
Yes, I think he's been so addicted to the adoration of his wife and his son, mm-hmm. that he cannot die without it. And here's a chance to win her back a bit, because she's objecting to the fact that he's going to commit suicide in front of his son, scarring his son forever. Jonathan can't have that. He can't have her thinking, oh, what a selfish man. So he jumps down to prove that he's wonderful. And everything for him is about being wonderful. Look how wonderful I am. But it's too late.
Yeah. There's also that fairly horrifying moment where he tries to throw his son under the bus and push suspicion onto him, not knowing that his son can hear him. And kind of, what did that tell you about the depth of his narcissism and his psychosis at that point when you read that moment in the script? And did it parlay into a lot of moments that you crafted earlier on in the series, knowing that that was the level that he was going to reach?
Yeah, there were no depths to his awfulness, really, and he has to suggest it's Henry there because he's stuck. He's absolutely cornered. I mean, everything's pointing to him, including the discovery of the hammer, and it's a last desperate bid. And yes, accusing his son is pretty revolting, but even worse in a way, I found the scene just afterwards when Henry says, "I heard you," and I'm able to bring him round with sort of nice, cozy daddy talk, like we're still mates and we're going to go on that road trip. And I remember the crew saying they thought that was particularly sick.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. It's also really interesting that we get the details later on of his mother and her viewpoint, and describing that he's kind of always had these personality traits and tendencies ever since childhood, which is very different from something developing throughout his life as he was a bit older. So did that kind of cause you to dive in and do a bit more research in terms of child psychosis and what that would look like from a very young age and how that's developed as he's gone into adulthood?
Well, I was always asking myself the question whether he'd always been a sociopath or whether there was some bit of damage early on. Mm-hmm. And there's quite a big difference there, because if there was some damage, then maybe there's a human being way back in his past that could be reignited, who could feel compassion, sympathy for other human beings. But I chose that he was born the way he was. And I think that's the only way you can explain quite how bleak he is.
Yeah. I also know that you liked, no matter what the role is, that you always like to craft out a really in-depth biography for your character, kind of starting from birth, going all the way through their childhood, and was interested in kind of when that became part of your process and when you realized that that was a really valuable tool and a necessity for you as you approached each character.
Well, actually, I have sort of always done it, although maybe it's become more deranged in the last 5 years. And it's partly because, it's one of the things Stanislavski talks about, and he teaches acting, and you sort of, there's no limit to how deep you can go into a character. So I guess it is partly that, but it's also, I get terribly nervous, and I feel the more prep I do, the less likely I am to suddenly have a crisis of nerves on the set. So I want to be unbelievably deeply prepared. It's like marinading in the character for a really long time.
Mm-hmm. Do you find it something where the more in depth you go, the more that you just have it very ingrained and then you can kind of throw it away once you're on set?
Yes, well, that's the beauty of it. Mm-hmm. Same with the lines. Especially as I get older, I learn them way, way in advance, so that there is no way I can forget them. They're like dance moves that are just in your body. And then you have room to improvise when you're actually on the set, because, on the set throws all kinds of curveballs at you in every direction. Mm-hmm. Oh, Christ, I didn't think, we'd be now setting it outdoors. It was originally planned to be indoors. I didn't think, there'd be 14 extras screaming in the background. I didn't think, the other actor would want to change that particular line. That screws me up. So you've got to be ready to be adaptable, and just being very, very prepared seems to help with that.
Yeah. What did you feel the curveballs were that were thrown in your direction on this particular project?
I'm not sure that there were that many. I found it was a very smooth running kind of Rolls-Royce engine. I mean, these are top people I was working with. Susanna Bin knows what she's doing. She really does. There's no dithering. She's made a lot of absolutely brilliant films, and it's very clear, almost scarily clear. I want this, now I want that. In terms of shots and things, she didn't talk to me like that, but very, very clear. And then, Nicole knows what she's doing. Donald Sutherland knows what he's doing. Noah Duke knows what he's doing. So, and the crew, my God, we had basically Scorsese's New York crew. It's the absolute best on the East Coast. And just, you notice after all these years of filming, you just notice, my God, that gaffer. That's a special gaffer. That's a special boom guy.
Yeah, no, it makes such a huge difference. And you kind of jumping back to your character biography as well, I wanted to ask you about kind of how that came into play, in particular with crafting out Jonathan and just the aspects beyond, his profession and his family that you found it most useful to construct and create when you were putting that together for him.
I always saw him as being a kind of wonder kid growing up, doing very, very well at school. Mm-hmm. Quite charming, maybe attractive. He could get the girls all right. And then I think his parents would have started to slightly worry about him because he just doesn't seem to show any empathy or compassion, which culminates in the terrible episode of his sister. Mm-hmm. And then I think after he left home, I always thought he went to Paris and became quite pretentious. I think he was fell under the spell of a sort of black sheep of the family uncle who had gone quasi-Parisian and was very naughty with the ladies and quite into sort of left-wing politics and quite intellectually pretentious, very rive gauche, and that this made Jonathan even more kind of grand and really pleased with himself and slightly above, Americans. And although he hides it very well, I think there's just extraordinary arrogance in him. And funny enough, the ring I wear, I don't know if you noticed I was wearing a ring. That was my uncle's in my head. He was given to me. It's a little black ring, and it's really the only sign of this bit of past in Jonathan that you can see visually.
Yeah, I also have to ask, because I think it's partly personal curiosity, in terms of the fact that we find out that he lost his job 3 months ago and he's been continuing to pretend that he's at work. What did you kind of build out and think about in terms of what he was doing with all of that time? Because that's more time than he would have spent in his relationship. It's an extraordinary amount of time to say you're at the hospital for a 12-hour shift and to disappear.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it was spent with Eleanor. Part of it because he simply can't resist her. Even though she's unbelievably dangerous and she's like a bomb that's about to go off, she could spill the beans at any second. He can't really resist her. And I sometimes wonder if he saw in her a kind of kindred spirit and that maybe she was another sociopath, unbelievably selfish. She'd really used poor Fernando and was on the make. And it was like a meeting of two really terrible reptiles.
Yeah. And, before you were shooting, I know that, Susanna Beers mentioned that you would often call her and kind of dive into a lot of the lines and ask a lot of questions. What were some of the questions that you were throwing her way that were really important for you to kind of go into on a deeper level with the scripts with her?
Oh, God, it was so much. I mean, we spent a lot of time, she and I spent a lot of time talking about the murder because I was very keen that it should be crystal clear by the end of episode 6 that I was the killer and that there shouldn't be any residual ambiguity about that, which I detected in one draft. And she was on my side about that. And she wanted to shoot the murder, which was never written into any of the scripts. And so we got to the point where we wanted to shoot the murder, and we asked David to write some pages for it, and he wasn't available. So in the end, it was sort of I sketched out something, and there was a lot of back and forth about that with Suzanne and the producers, and that's what we shot. So yeah, there was a lot of things about the murder, and yes, but the sort of things we're talking about, like. Yeah. Is there any part of Jonathan that had any kind of capacity for human empathy? Could it be lurking from childhood? It just got squashed by some terrible event and you can get it back, and he does feel something for his son. In the end, I decided, and Suzanne decided, that no, it's just about he's in love with their love for him.
I also thought it was a really interesting choice that she did a full table read of every single episode together. So kind of a full 6-hour sit down. Was that something that you then found to be really useful just because of kind of the osmosis that you got of the character? And, were there things that you discovered and understood better about him coming out the back of that process?
Well, to be absolutely honest, I've always hated read-throughs and also found them completely useless. I don't. It's the script that you've read in the privacy of your own office. I don't learn anything new, especially because most good actors deliberately don't really perform in them. They want to save it up for the day, and so they're sort of mumbling. So you don't know what how they're gonna perform the thing. You don't. I don't learn much, but there are some people who love it.
Mm-hmm. Did you find that was the rehearsal process with Susanna and with Nicole more about kind of constructing out a scene, or more just about having conversations and uncovering some of the deeper layers within the scripts with each other? Or what did that look like?
We barely had any rehearsal at all.
Mm-hmm.
What these tend to turn into with films and television is rehearsal just turns into a script meeting. You sit there and around a table, and one of you says, I don't know about this moment. And, you say, maybe it could be this instead. So it's more like a script conference. There's very little acting goes on.
Yeah. I love that you've described kind of working with Nicole Kidman, particularly on a drama project like this, as being like going up against a tennis pro one-to-one, and how it really elevates your game. So just wanted to ask what it was really specifically about her process and the way that she approaches her craft that you felt also just really elevated your own in your performance.
Well, she's really good on this distinction between being prepared and being rehearsed. Mm-hmm. Rehearsed is something you don't really want with films. It's anything that is rehearsed and then repeated in front of a camera is a bit dead. She's really good at saving it up and creating it fresh on the day. But to do that, you need to be very prepared. And so that was great. That's what I like. And so you don't know, she could surprise you at any time by doing something slightly different. And mm-hmm. It was exactly like Meryl Streep did that. She was never the same in 2 takes, ever, ever, ever. She's always trying new stuff.
Yeah. And given that it sounds like Nicole's very kind of instinctual with the way that she comes in, and there's a really large part of your process that's analytical, did you find that you were adjusting your style into hers a little bit, or that it just really complemented each other on the day?
Well, you have to hope that it just works. Mm-hmm. There's always this thing, especially for me, with these huge biographies of the character and if I think we met in 2001 and we went to this party and, we tried to have a kid and it didn't work out, and she had to have some help with hormones, and then we produced Henry. That's my version of our marriage. I have no idea what Nicole's is. And we did talk about it a bit, but I often get the feeling with other actors, these are things they prefer to keep secret. Mm-hmm. And so it's a fine balance. You need to be in sync, but at the same time, you don't want to. Some actors like to keep stuff secret. Even doing this mm-hmm. day of interviews today, I find it a little weird because one's instinct more is to leave everything mysterious. And mm-hmm. everyone's saying, well, so what was he thinking, and why did you do that? And it's a little bit like dissecting a frog. It just feels it's not much fun for the frog.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I also, I know that early on, one of the things that you were doing was talking to oncologists and talking to some doctors, both in the UK and the US. Did you find a difference between the approach and the personality types that you found between England and the US, or was it very much kind of the same across the board in what you gathered was useful to pull into this character?
The oncologists, the
mm-hmm.
pediatric oncologists that I met in Britain and in New York were very similar in that they were wonderful men. There's no question about it. And very happy men. That's the weird thing. They're dealing with children who are, seriously ill and dying. But they had that strange aura of the person who's utterly fulfilled and who goes to bed knowing they've done an amazing day's work. And I couldn't have liked them more, and they were all very helpful. But I think I've said this before, the doctor that I found most useful was not an oncologist at all. He was just this doctor that my brother and his wife and friends all use, who's a real sort of dish that the ladies love. And I met him, and he was beautifully dressed, and he had his own sort of posh Upper East Side club, and he was very nice. But you thought, yeah, you're useful. You're great, but you're just a little too good to be true, which is always how I wanted Jonathan to seem.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting the way that the show dives in so specifically to that kind of like echelon and higher class society within New York, because there's a lot of specifics to it in that particular location. Kind of what were some of the aspects that you really thought were unique to his experience in New York society that you really wanted to pull into those on-screen relationships with the people he interacts with?
You're talking about physical locations and things.
Well, more just kind of like what the specifics are in terms of that society somewhere like New
Oh, I
York.
see. Well, that is a society I know quite well because um, I live a quite similar kind of life in West London. You know,
Yeah.
my boy goes to a posh little school, and there's fundraisers, and you know, there's bitchery amongst the mums, and so I do know that well. And I also know the Upper East Side New York version because
Yeah.
my brother is a banker there, has lived there since the 80s, and I've watched his kids go through posh Upper East Side schools. So it's all very familiar territory to me. Didn't
Yeah.
require much research.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the scenes where he's actually in prison and kind of what you did to understand what that experience would be for him. And also just thinking about how much he would still be controlling and hiding everything, because still for the most part, we don't really see his true colors, but we start to see little flecks of it come out, particularly when he gets into that fight in the yard out back.
Yeah. I did try and fix up a visit to Rikers Island, but I was told it was impossible. So in the end, it was very useful that we actually shot all that prison sequence in a real, it's a place which is still, half of it's still functioning as a prison. So it's absolutely still got the whole smell of reality about it. And just half a day there, and you get the feel and the sort of smell and the noises and the awful sort of lack of budget. You know, it's just, it's rough. It's not a place you want to be. And that was quite useful. In fact, that everyone got depressed during that week or so. It was a big experience. And people got ill, and the air was awful and full of sort of black dust that came out of your nose. You don't want to go to jail in New York.
Yeah. You know, and you also construct your performance in such a stunning way that by the time he kind of cracks towards the end, it feels earned and it doesn't feel like a complete surprise. And so was it something where you were consciously thinking about the way that you were going to allow little cracks of it from underneath the surface throughout your performance, so that by the time it gets there, it feels like it has been a journey and it has been coming? Or did you just find that you really found it within the scenes and the scripts, the way that they were written and the way that Susanna was directing you?
Well, it was a very, very fine balancing act because I had to be as convincing as I possibly could be when saying I didn't do it and I love you, Grace, I love you, Henry, because otherwise I would have destroyed the whole whodunit fun of the thing, because there was so much evidence anyway against Jonathan, the circumstantial evidence so strong that if I'd been in any way less than as convincing as I could be, it'd be show over. Oh, it's just him. This is boring. Let's go and watch Queen's Gambit instead. So I had to do that. But equally, I was aware that if anyone ever watched this twice, I didn't want them to think, well, that's just ridiculous. There's no way this guy is the same guy as the one who's in the car at the end with Henry and murders the woman. And so I had to just keep an awareness of that all the time. Like, this is who it is. And this is why I had notes for two characters in my margin of my script. There was guilty Jonathan, who I called John Boy, spoilt little John Boy, JB, and what he was thinking. And then there was innocent Jonathan, IJ, who was his outward projection of himself. And what they were thinking were not always the same. And this was the juggling act. And I could lean slightly more on one, slightly more on the other. Mostly all the time on IJ to keep the whodunit alive, but just occasionally, just a cast across the eye of JB.
Yeah. I also love the way that Susanna Bier directs it and a lot of the choices that she makes in terms of using the camera to create a very claustrophobic environment with her characters to add to the overall tone. Does that have any impact on any of the choices you're making, or do you prefer not to really think about what the different camera setups and positions and angles are going to be when you're doing your performance?
Oh no, because I'm interested anyway in that,
Mm-hmm.
and she's very good with that. And Anthony Dodd Noble was the DP, is a
Mm-hmm.
great DP, and was doing fascinating work. There's a wonderful operator, Italian guy, choosing extraordinary angles, and so I was interested in that just sort of as a film enthusiast.
Mm-hmm.
But also, the more film you do, the more you realize you do slightly alter your performance for the shot.
Mm-hmm.
A big wide shot of me talking to Grace, very pretty, probably useful at the beginning or the end of the scene, but you don't have to give it your full effort because they're not going to use it much, and you need to save that up, you know. And progressively, you get more and more intense until it's a close up or a close to shot,
Yeah.
and then you sort of give it your all. And an
Yeah.
equal size of performance, you might be able
Mm-hmm.
to do quite big things physically in a wide shot, but you certainly don't want to do that in a close shot if you can help it.
Yeah. And from the experience, kind of looking back at the project with playing Jonathan and working with this incredible team, what are the ways in which you feel like this experience and this particular role has evolved and elevated your own craft as an actor?
Uh, well, I mean, it was pretty straight. After episode one, it's pretty straight drama.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even with something like A Very English Scandal, which is dramatic, it was laced with black comedy everywhere. And when
Mm-hmm.
I've done dramatic things in the past, there has been an element of comedy around as well. But really,
Mm-hmm.
that is gone completely for
Mm-hmm.
episodes 2 to 6 in this. So it's full on drama and a lot of emotion, albeit looking back, fake emotion, but it had to be convincing, and therefore I had to give it my best shot. So there's a lot of getting into the right emotional state, you know, and hiding myself away with the right music and thinking sad thoughts and all that.
Yeah, well, it's been such a wonderful performance to watch over these last 6 weeks, and you did such a wonderful job. And thank you so much for talking with us today about all
Oh,
of
thank
this.
you. All right.